You want to be that cop. You tried. And you want to sit here and try to say you didn't do it? Man, slap me!
In a U.S. federal courtroom, a case that sent shockwaves far beyond America's borders reached a critical turning point, one that exposed the dark mechanics of an international assassination plot. This week, Nikhil Gupta, 54, formally pleaded guilty to murder for hire and conspiracy charges, admitting his role in a scheme to arrange the killing of Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon, a U.S.-based Sikh leader and political activist. According to federal prosecutors, the plot was not theoretical. It was operational, deliberate, and moving toward execution. Court documents reveal that the plan involved coordination across borders, the use of intermediaries, and what authorities describe as a clear intent to carry out a contract killing on American soil. The intended target, Pannoon, was placed under threat not because of a personal dispute, prosecutors say, but because of his political and activist profile, raising immediate concerns about foreign-linked violence and the reach of transnational criminal networks. The guilty plea brings legal clarity to a case that has carried significant diplomatic and security implications. U.S. officials have framed the matter as a direct challenge to the rule of law, emphasizing that attempts to orchestrate targeted killings, particularly those tied to political expression, will be met with aggressive prosecution. While no life was ultimately taken, authorities stress that the seriousness of the crime lies in its intent. Murder-for-hire plots, federal prosecutors argue, do not become less severe simply because they are disrupted before blood is shed. The admission of guilt now places Gupta at the center of a case that has reshaped conversations about political safety, international accountability, and how far criminal conspiracies are willing to go. This is the story of a plot stopped before it was completed, but one that revealed how close it came, and why U.S. authorities say the threat was real. The guilty plea entered this week by Nikhil Gupta has pulled back the curtain on a case that U.S. authorities describe as far more than an ordinary criminal conspiracy. At its core, prosecutors say, was a deliberate plan to carry out a targeted killing on American soil, one that carried serious implications for national security, political freedom, and international law enforcement cooperation. Gupta, 54, admitted in federal court that he took part in a murder-for-hire scheme aimed at killing Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon, a U.S.-based Sikh leader known for his political activism. According to court filings, the plot was not spontaneous or symbolic. Prosecutors say it was structured, funded, and actively moving toward execution before it was intercepted by authorities. Federal investigators allege that Gupta played a coordinating role, acting as an intermediary in a wider conspiracy. The plan, as laid out in court, involved identifying the target, discussing logistics, and arranging payment for the killing. At no point, prosecutors stressed, was the intent ambiguous. This was, they argued, a clear agreement to commit murder in exchange for money, one of the most serious crimes under U.S. federal law. What elevates the case beyond a typical murder-for-hire plot is its international dimension. Court documents indicate that the conspiracy crossed borders, relying on communications and coordination that extended outside the United States. That aspect immediately drew the attention of federal agencies tasked not only with criminal enforcement, but with protecting the country from foreign-linked threats. Authorities have been careful in their public statements, focusing on what has been proven in court rather than speculation. They emphasize that the guilty plea confirms the core allegations: intent, agreement, and overt acts taken in furtherance of the plot. While the intended killing was ultimately prevented, prosecutors made clear that prevention does not lessen culpability under the law. Murder for hire is complete when the agreement is made and steps are taken to carry it out, legal experts note. The absence of a completed killing does not reduce the seriousness of the crime. That principle formed the backbone of the government's case and was underscored during the plea hearing. The intended target, Pannoon, was identified by prosecutors as a political activist whose work placed him at the center of contentious international issues. While court proceedings have avoided detailed discussion of ideology, officials acknowledge that the case raises broader concerns about attempts to silence political voices through violence, particularly when those attempts reach across national borders. From a law enforcement perspective, the case demonstrates how modern assassination plots are uncovered. Investigators relied on a combination of intelligence gathering, undercover operations, and coordinated surveillance to identify and disrupt the conspiracy before it reached its final stage. Such operations are often complex, requiring patience and careful evidence collection to ensure prosecutions can withstand scrutiny. The guilty plea itself represents a decisive moment. By admitting to the charges, Gupta removed the need for a full trial and acknowledged the factual basis of the government's case. In federal court, such pleas are not accepted lightly. Judges require defendants to confirm under oath that they understand the charges and are pleading guilty voluntarily. Prosecutors describe the plea as an important step toward accountability. They frame the case as a warning that the United States will aggressively pursue those who attempt to organize violence within its borders, regardless of where the planning originates. Plots like this threaten not just individuals, but the rule of law itself, one official said in a statement summarizing the case. The legal consequences for Gupta are now substantial. Murder for hire and conspiracy charges carry severe potential sentences under federal guidelines, often involving decades in prison. Sentencing will be determined at a later hearing, where a judge will consider factors such as the seriousness of the offense, the defendant's role, and the broader impact of the crime. Beyond the courtroom, the case has drawn international attention. Analysts note that it sits at the intersection of criminal justice and geopolitics, highlighting how political conflicts can spill into transnational criminal conduct. While officials have avoided attributing the plot to any state actor in open court, the case has nonetheless heightened scrutiny of how activist figures are protected abroad. For civil liberties advocates, the outcome underscores the importance of safeguarding political expression. The idea that a US-based activist could be targeted through a paid killing has raised alarms about the vulnerability of dissidents and the lengths to which adversaries may go to silence them. At the same time, authorities stress that the system worked as intended. The plot was detected, disrupted, and prosecuted before any loss of life occurred. That outcome, they argue, reflects the strength of interagency cooperation and the value of proactive investigation. As the case now moves towards sentencing, attention will turn to the broader implications. How severe should punishment be when intent is proven, but harm is prevented? What message does the sentence send to others considering similar crimes? And how should nations respond when violent conspiracies cross borders? For now, the guilty plea stands as a clear legal conclusion to one phase of the story. It confirms that the plot was real, that the intent was criminal, and that federal authorities intervened in time. What remains is the task of determining punishment and assessing what this case reveals about the evolving nature of international threats in an increasingly connected world. Court filings and statements from federal prosecutors outline a methodical conspiracy, one that investigators say followed a familiar pattern in modern murder-for-hire cases, but with an unusually serious international reach. According to the record, Nikhil Gupta did not act on impulse. Instead, authorities allege he participated in deliberate planning steps intended to transform intent into action. Prosecutors say the conspiracy centered on identifying a specific target, agreeing on payment, and advancing logistics for the killing of Gurpatwant Singh Panoon. These elements, target selection, financial agreement, and concrete steps, are critical under U.S. law. Once they are established, the offense is complete even if the killing never occurs. Investigators emphasize that this legal threshold guided their approach from the outset. Federal agents describe how the case came into focus through intelligence-led policing. In such investigations, authorities do not wait for violence to occur. They seek corroboration of intent and action. Communications, often encrypted, are examined alongside financial movements and travel discussions. The goal is to determine whether talk is merely rhetorical or whether a plot has crossed into actionable territory. According to prosecutors, the conspiracy crossed that line. Evidence presented during the plea hearing showed discussions consistent with payment for a killing and coordination intended to carry it out. While many operational details remain sealed, officials confirmed that overt acts were taken in furtherance of the plan, enough to support the charges to which Gupta pleaded guilty. A pivotal component of the investigation involved undercover techniques and controlled interactions. Law enforcement sources note that such operations are designed to test intent while preventing harm. By carefully managing contact and documenting communications, investigators can establish a clear evidentiary trail without allowing a plot to progress to violence. In this case, authorities say those safeguards worked. Interagency cooperation was also central. Federal prosecutors highlighted coordination among investigative units and intelligence partners to monitor the conspiracy's evolution. In cross-border cases, agencies often rely on lawful information sharing to track communications and movements that span jurisdictions. Officials stress that adherence to legal standards is essential to ensure any prosecution withstands challenge in court. When the case reached the plea stage, the government's focus shifted to clarity and finality. Guilty pleas in federal court require a detailed factual basis. Judges insist that defendants acknowledge not only the charges, but the conduct supporting them. During the hearing, Gupta confirmed under oath that he understood the allegations and admitted his role in the plot, an admission that carries significant legal weight. Legal analysts note that the decision to plead guilty often reflects the strength of the evidence. In complex conspiracy cases, trials can be lengthy and technical. A plea spares victims and witnesses from protracted proceedings and allows the court to move directly to sentencing considerations. For prosecutors, it also secures accountability without the uncertainty of a jury verdict. The intended target's safety became a public concern as details emerged. Federal authorities reiterated that threats against individuals based on political views are treated with the utmost seriousness. While they avoided inflammatory language, officials underscored that such plots undermine fundamental protections for free expression. The case, they said, sends a message that attempts to outsource violence will be confronted decisively. Sentencing now looms as the next milestone. Under federal guidelines, murder-for-hire conspiracies carry severe penalties, often measured in decades. Judges consider multiple factors: the defendant's role, the degree of planning, any cooperation with authorities, and the broader impact of the offense. The absence of a completed killing may be weighed, but it does not erase the gravity of proven intent. Beyond the individual outcome, the case has prompted wider discussion among security experts. Transnational conspiracies, they argue, reflect a changing threat environment where borders offer little insulation. Political disputes, financial incentives, and encrypted communications can converge quickly. Preventing violence in this context requires proactive investigation and robust legal frameworks, both of which were on display here. Civil liberties advocates have also weighed in, emphasizing that the successful disruption of the plot demonstrates how law enforcement can protect targets without curtailing lawful speech. The case illustrates a balance, intervening early to stop violence while grounding action in evidence and due process. As proceedings move towards sentencing, the broader significance remains in focus. The guilty plea confirms that the conspiracy was real and actionable, and that authorities intervened before lives were lost. It also raises enduring questions about deterrence. Will severe penalties dissuade others from attempting similar crimes? How should nations collaborate when conspiracies span borders? For now, the record is clear. A plot was formed, steps were taken, and the justice system responded. The next chapter will determine punishment, but the message has already been delivered. Attempts to contract violence on U.S. soil, even when stopped short, will meet the full force of federal law. With the guilty plea now entered, the case has moved into a phase that will determine not just punishment, but precedent. Federal sentencing in murder-for-hire conspiracies is among the most severe in the U.S. criminal system, reflecting the law's view that intent to kill, paired with concrete steps, is an existential threat to public safety. Judges are instructed to weigh planning, coordination, and the seriousness of the objective, even when violence is prevented. At sentencing, the court will consider the defendant's role and the scope of the conspiracy. Prosecutors are expected to argue that the offense involved deliberate targeting, cross-border coordination, and steps taken to operationalize the plot, factors that typically increase exposure under the federal guidelines. Defense counsel, by contrast, may emphasize the absence of physical harm, the defendant's acceptance of responsibility through a guilty plea, and any cooperation offered to authorities. These competing narratives will shape the ultimate term. Legal experts note that in conspiracy cases, courts place particular weight on overt acts, the actions taken to advance the crime. Once the line from talk to action is crossed, sentencing tends to reflect the risk posed, not merely the outcome. That principle is designed to deter would-be conspirators from assuming they can escape serious consequences if a plot is interrupted. Beyond the courtroom, the guilty plea has produced diplomatic reverberations. Transnational plots inevitably raise questions about jurisdiction, intelligence sharing, and the protection of political figures abroad. While officials have been careful to limit public commentary to matters proven in court, the case has sharpened scrutiny on how nations cooperate to prevent targeted violence that crosses borders. Security analysts point out that successful disruption often depends on lawful information exchange and clear prosecutorial pathways once a plot is detected. The case also underscores the evolving nature of political risk in an era of encrypted communications and global mobility. Investigators increasingly focus on early indicators, financial arrangements, coded language, and logistical planning, rather than waiting for weapons to change hands. That proactive posture is controversial in some quarters, but prosecutors argue it is essential when the potential harm is irreversible. For civil liberties observers, the proceedings highlight a key balance: aggressive prevention anchored in due process. The acceptance of a guilty plea after judicial scrutiny of the factual basis demonstrates how courts test the government's claims before imposing punishment. That scrutiny is central to maintaining public confidence, especially in cases that attract international attention. The impact on potential targets is another dimension. Threat mitigation extends beyond arrests. It includes protective measures, risk assessments, and ongoing coordination with local authorities. Officials stress that safeguarding individuals targeted for their political views is not a discretionary exercise. It is a constitutional obligation. The disruption of the plot, they say, validates investment in preventive security rather than reactive response. As sentencing approaches, observers are watching for signals about deterrence. A substantial term would reinforce the message that contracting violence, even unsuccessfully, invites penalties comparable to completed crimes. A more measured sentence could emphasize rehabilitation and cooperation while still affirming culpability. Either way, the court's reasoning will be parsed closely by prosecutors and defense attorneys alike. The case has also prompted discussion about how prosecutors frame intent. Precision matters. Courts distinguish between abstract rhetoric and actionable conspiracy. Here, the guilty plea removes ambiguity, confirming that the threshold was met. That clarity simplifies sentencing, but also informs future investigations by delineating what evidence satisfies the standard. Internationally, the outcome may influence how allied jurisdictions coordinate when threats surface abroad but materialize domestically. Legal scholars suggest that clearer protocols on evidence sharing, extradition considerations, and witness protection could further streamline responses to similar plots. The goal is speed without sacrificing legality. As the process advances, the central facts are settled. The remaining question is proportionality, how to calibrate punishment to risk, intent, and prevention. Sentencing will close the judicial loop, but the broader implications, deterrence, diplomacy, and preventive policing, will continue to shape policy discussion. In the end, the guilty plea has already accomplished one thing decisively. It transformed a clandestine plan into a public record of accountability. The forthcoming sentence will determine consequences, but the signal to would-be conspirators is already clear. Plots to hire violence are prosecuted as the gravest of crimes, whether or not a trigger is ever pulled. As this case reaches its closing phase, the guilty plea by Nikhil Gupta stands as a defining moment in how the United States confronts violent conspiracies before they turn fatal. The facts established in court leave little ambiguity. This was not reckless talk or distant rhetoric, but a concrete plan to arrange the killing of Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon, a plan stopped only through early detection and decisive intervention. For prosecutors, the case reinforces a core principle of federal law: intent plus action equals culpability. Murder-for-hire statutes exist precisely because waiting for violence to occur is unacceptable when credible plots are underway. By securing a guilty plea, authorities demonstrated that prevention is not a lesser form of justice. It is justice executed at the right time. The implications extend well beyond a single defendant. This case sends a clear deterrent signal to anyone considering outsourcing violence. Borders do not shield conspiracies, and distance does not dilute responsibility. Federal courts will assert jurisdiction where American lives and freedoms are threatened, and penalties will reflect the seriousness of the risk posed, not merely the outcome avoided. Security experts point to the broader lesson for modern policing. Transnational plots often rely on encrypted communication, intermediaries, and financial arrangements that can be traced when agencies coordinate effectively. The success here underscores the value of lawful, intelligence-led investigations and interagency cooperation, tools designed to stop harm before it becomes irreversible. There is also a constitutional dimension. Protecting individuals targeted for their political views is fundamental to a free society. When violence is weaponized to silence speech, the rule of law must respond swiftly and transparently. By bringing the conspiracy into open court and securing an admission of guilt, the justice system reaffirmed that political expression cannot be curtailed through fear or force. As sentencing approaches, the court's decision will shape how future cases are charged and resolved. A substantial sentence would underscore deterrence. A carefully calibrated one would still affirm culpability while acknowledging cooperation and prevention. Either way, the record is now fixed. The plot was real, actionable, and unlawful. Ultimately, this case illustrates a hard truth of the modern era. Threats can emerge from anywhere, but accountability is not optional. The justice system acted before lives were lost, converting secrecy into transparency and conspiracy into consequence. If you want clear, fact-checked, cinematic news coverage that cuts through speculation, like this video to support responsible journalism. Share it so others understand how justice works behind the scenes. And subscribe for more in-depth investigations grounded in verified sources.